All right. It's been a long time.
Over a year.
I feel like it's been longer than that. What a opening monologue or opening for us. I thought it was a intro to that '70s show. I was waiting for someone to yell Wisconsin.
Well, I'm looking forward to that '90s show.
I am looking forward to that. That's the last time the Flyers were good.
Speaking of that '90s, they're playing the Sabres right now, and the Sabres are wearing their reverse retro with the flaming hamster on the crest.
I don't think it's a hamster.
I think they're hideous jerseys, personally.
Oh, I mean, it's Barnaby. That's what that reminds me of. You know, like.
I think of Danny
Barnaby.
B. I think of Ryan Miller. I think of Umberger getting knocked back a century.
Are you still sleeping?
Oh. Farabee, young Beezer with the snipe. They're back. They're going to make it 5-6. further away from Bedard.
After that thumping they got last night.
Yeah. Last night just showed, that yes, they're better than the bottom 3 or 4 teams, but they're so far away from the top 8 or 10 teams. They're stuck just below the middle, right where you don't want to be.
Well, what was it after their 4-game winning streak? Their playoff chances they jumped up to 13.3%. That's just.
And then last night it went down to 6.6.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Yeah.
Now it's back up 7.8 with this 2-goal lead in the first period.
Their real playoff chances are a flat 0. Absolutely 0 chance. Playoffs.
So,
are we talking playoffs? We're not coming into this episode talking about the playoffs.
So reality is, right, we've been waiting for a turnaround. You know, we had the big explosion right before the bubble, and since then we've been waiting for a turnaround. So we heard from Chuck this offseason, aggressive retool. We all know Chuck's on the I can't even say he's on a hot seat. It's a pretty much open secret that this offseason at least he'll be the
I equate him to Montgomery Burns from Simpsons. He had all those diseases, but none of them can get through the door to actually kill him, so he was alive. Chuck, I think so many people want him fired. None of them can fit through the door to actually fire him.
I've never been so disappointed in a front office, and this is dealing with Howie Roseman and his drafts, than dealing with Chuck Fletcher. Like Johnny Hockey wanted to come here.
He did, and Chuck actually never even called him. Period. Not once. That's obscene, and it just comes down to Chuck not. It comes down to Chuck not realizing exactly how much it was going to cost to move JVR to create room for him. But I'll be honest with you, looking back on it, it may be for the better in the long term, because if they had signed him, their cap situation would be so bad, and they'd have zero wiggle room, and they might be 4 points better than they are right now. I mean, look where Columbus is with him and Line. Granted, Liney's been hurt and their defense got decimated, but they're just a pitiful hockey team. It would have been better. It would have been better for the fans. It would have had some fan excitement. But it just comes down to, like, they shouldn't have even – if they should have realized after last season the dreaded R word, the rebuild, not the retooling. Like there's no retooling this team. They needed to rebuild, and trading away assets for D'Angelo just makes zero sense. You wait to see if you can get him as a free agent. If you can't, it doesn't matter. You're not, like, you weren't going to win this season no matter what. So like, what's the difference? So I just don't I don't understand anything. There's no direction. There's nothing.
Well, and they can't voice one. That's the issue. That's my issue with there's kind of both GMs back to back. It's like every move that gets made didn't really work. And now we're sitting here and 10 years into accepting that there's going to be some pain back with Hextall when they were in Capel. And here we are now, better than Capel, but sitting here with still a lack of an explainable vision from the organization, except for Torts comes out and says the R word, says rebuild, but no one from the organization, like no one from management has. And it's obvious they need to do something big, whether that's accept losing or make some kind of move.
Yeah. Something has to hit. I mean, at this point, you have to sell. The guys, they're gonna eventually trade JVR. I'm sure they'll retain half his salary for whoever, which is fine because it's up at the end of the season. Doesn't matter. And with all their long-term injury reserve money, it doesn't matter. They can easily squeeze it. And they're going to trade Braun because he's a right-handed veteran defenseman. It'll be funny if he goes back to the Rangers and we get another draft pick for him. So my guess is they get a second rounder for JVR because he can score goals, and there's not a lot of guys out there. My guess is you'll get a third or fourth, probably a fourth for Braun because he's a year older. And then I think they might trade McEwen because he's got 1 year left. He's a solid player. You don't need him. You have Delory signed to a 32-year contract with a full no movement clause. So you don't need two tough guys, not in today's age. It's overkill. And they have plenty of young guys that are depth players that are actually pretty good if they can stay healthy. And then Hayes is the big one. Like, who is going to, even if I believe 3 more years left with him on the team, on the roster, contract-wise, if I can actually bring this up. 3 more years.
It's
We've got 3 more years at 7.1. Good God.
They're going to have to retain 50%, I would imagine.
Yeah, but, I mean, or you buy him out.
Well, it's 3 years to 50% or 6 years.
Yeah.
Right?
You get the easier hit next year. Then you have 2 years of, what was it, in the 4s. But the problem is, it's not just you taking half. Like, some other team needs to take half as well. Yeah, he's an all-star. He's an all-star my ass. No, check that. He's been an all-star player for this team, but TK is by far and away their best player. Not even close.
Yeah, I don't understand how he's not an all-star. He just scored his 22nd goal. And
the all-star, all-star thing's a joke. Has been. It's time for it to be honest, all the all-star games in every league, they're all jokes.
Every sport.
Yeah.
Every sport, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Just have a skills competition.
Yeah. No. Give me
another
outdoor game. Give me another outdoor game, not another not an all-star game. Something
point
fun.
being though.
What's that?
Point being I said point being is
so
you're looking at a small handful of deadline moves, right? As far as this whatever turning it around looks like, right? So an extra second that may or may not ever turn into a player. I think second rounders are about 50% or so play like 30 games in the NHL. And third rounder, fourth rounder, it gets worse as the rounds go on. So TK has been their best player. I would imagine nobody is unmovable at this point, right? Like other than maybe Hart.
Yeah, I mean, if if you're a good GM, which clearly Chuck is not, there should be on this team. There should be no untouchables. I don't agree with. If it was me, I think Hart, like someone would have to make you an obscene offer to pry him off your roster, because you have that's the hardest thing is to get a goalie. Now you have Hart, who's a top 15 goalie in this league, probably with a better team, he's probably top 10. In Torts' book, Noah Cates is definitely untouchable. He'll shank it. He'll shank you if you try to pry him off his roster. But then they actually looks like Urson is. They're very high on him. He's played very well. Granted, small sample size, but it was all signs are pointing to him being the best goalie at training camp, and he's played awesome. So unless his play just completely dissipates, he'll be your backup goalie next year. And we were talking before we came on. If Fedotov gets released from Siberia, I mean, it's a good problem to have as long as the Russians and the ambulance don't pick him up again. You have potentially 3 really good goalies, and then guess what you can do? You can trade one of them if you need to get another piece down the line. Obviously, not next season. You want them to establish themselves. But let's say Urson keeps this up, and him and Hart are both awesome next year. Then after next season, I believe. After next season, Hart will have one more year left, and if Urson establishes himself as neck and neck with Hart, you could trade Hart or you could trade Urson if your team is right at that cusp. And with all the negativity surrounding this team and the organization, with a couple moves, but especially if they hit the lottery, the dumbass draft lottery, if they get Bedard, it all changes. It all goes all positive because you got a potential, generational talent for 3 years at $500,000 after with bonuses.
They're not getting
they're
not going to get Bedard.
They're not going to get Bedard.
Wait, hold on. They're not going to get this guy. Hold on.
Yeah, that guy.
Like the flick of his wrist,
yeah,
they're not getting Bedard.
Good. He's kind of good.
They're like,
I'm
let's
not
go
saying
go back to the juniors, and he has 6 points last night in the WHL.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not saying that they, I don't know. I'm not saying that you have to actively tank, but at some point you have to admit what you are. And they're a not good enough team, lacking high-end talent in a league where getting high-end talent, for the most part, not middle-level talent, high-end talent is homegrown.
Yeah, I mean,
and you need top 5 picks. Look at the last 10 Stanley Cup winners. Major contributors to those teams, other than maybe St. Louis, were 2 or more top 5 players homegrown.
I mean, St. Louis, their whole decor not the whole their top end of their decor was all homegrown. And
were they top 5?
So? What's that?
Were they top 5 picks?
Oh, I don't know about top. I don't know exactly where they were picked, but I mean, to be honest, it doesn't matter. They developed them. I mean, but
my point is that so Tampa, right? You have Hedman, Stamkos, Colorado. You have Mac, McCarr, right? St. Louis is kind of the outlier, I think, in that they don't have they have a lot of very good players that they were homegrown. To your point. But most of it, right? Pittsburgh, I know we hate to talk about it, but Pittsburgh, top 5 players in top 5 picks. It's just the way it works.
Yeah, but see, the other thing besides drafting, which drafting is very important, the other D word, developing. Like they haven't developed their players well enough. I mean, and also asset management. You haven't found. Now, some of it was out of their control. Like Provorov, is he a top flight defenseman, a number one defenseman? No, he's a second. He's a very very good second pair defenseman. But as he proved in 1920, if he has a competent partner, they can make a top pair. So, that's on Chuck. It's asset management. You besides trading away assets, but you also need to give your assets the best opportunity to perform. And he did that in 1920 with Niskanen. And again, that was out of his hands because of COVID. He retired and haven't been able to replace him. But it's his job to fill him. I don't blame him for the following season. But like he hasn't been able to fill that hole. Well, that's on he tried with Ellis, but again, he traded for a guy with injury issues at the time. It's his job to know it. It's his job to know it. So I don't crush him for it, but he should have probably done some more homework on it. He's clearly hurt, so it is what it is. Can't blame him for Coots, but the Ellis thing,
the Ellis is one of those things where like it's like such a nothing trade, but then you're tied to that, like how many years he had left.
Yep.
Right. Like that's really the.
But what he looked at,
he
was at the time 6 years left at 6.5, and if he's a top pair D at 6.5, I mean,
it's a great move.
It's a great contract.
Yeah, especially for what they gave up, right?
Yeah,
Patrick, yeah.
Yep. So, but it didn't work out.
It's gone. We have to let it go. Like
at the end of the day, it still falls at Chuck's feet. And the draft capital to trade for Ristolainen, I still don't think is a horrendous move at the time. They were trying to see if they can try to reconstruct the team again. Looking back at it, seeing where they were. They probably should have traded him at the deadline last year to recoup, and then, you give York that, at the time you didn't know about Ellis being out for, ever. He's at least on your second pair the entire time. So I don't know. They need to do something. They need to do something drastic, and it starts with Chuck. Chuck's got to go.
So why do you think?
Yeah.
Why do you think the Devils had such a quick turnaround, and the Rangers had somewhat of a quick turnaround?
Well, the
Devils had top. Go ahead.
They were gifted. They were gifted. Like they're top overall picks. And this is. I'll get back to something else. Like how many first teams that get the first overall pick were the worst team? It rarely happens. The Avalanche, the year they got Makar, they should have been the first over. They should have had the first overall pick, and they got at the time of the lottery, they got screwed. They fell 3 picks back. They went from 1 to 4, which was brutal. But they got Makar. So they did their homework, and they got lucky. No one scooped him up, and he's a generational defenseman. He's by far and away, in my opinion, the best defenseman in the league. And but it happens all the time. So the Flyers bringing in Torts. Initially, my opinion, I didn't like his. I don't like a lot of his stuff after in the post game stuff. But I understand some of it now that he's coaching the team that I like. I sort of understand some of it. I still think some of it's an act. Get some of it is to distract you from the issues that are actually going on with the team. But he has brought accountability, and it's shown. I mean, you look; he's completely rejuvenated TK's career. Right from the get-go, everyone thought TK was going to be his whipping boy, but I didn't think that. Right from the get-go, I thought that TK just wanted to improve his game, and he's a little He's a tenacious, tough little bastard, and I figured Torts would appreciate a player like him. I think his act with Hayes is getting a bit old, to be honest. At the time he was your leading scorer, and he keeps benching him, and in the scratch against the Rangers, I think that's going a little too far. But because for right now he's on your team, so mentally losing him for the rest of the season doesn't do you any good either.
So here you go. So obviously you see the rumblings on Twitter about the trade Carter Hart, and I came across something a couple weeks ago that the Flyers missed Shane Gostisbehere.
That shit. So to dial back though, Chris, he's playing with house money in a college building with no accountability. Like he can just, like that team stinks. And I mean that with all due respect to that they're still better than anybody I've ever played hockey with. But like that team is barely a franchise. So like the idea that he would rescue this team is silly. But to dial your question back to the Devils real fast, I think that he's your first pick, Jack Hughes' first pick. Who they had like top 5 picks over 7 years.
Yep.
Yeah, they were bad.
And they had not just bad. Like it's one of those things where so they made a move to sign Hamilton while they have these guys that are coming up that aren't costing them anything. That's just good management too. You can't just get the picks. You do have to manage your contracts as well. And look, it kills me. If you think I want to say something positive about the Devils,
listen,
that's something I would do.
It irks me when we talk about the Devils and they're doing good, and Pittsburgh, who somehow is always doing good. It's mind-boggling when you sit back and you look at our franchise, and we always joke around the poverty franchises, but the Flyers are looking more and more like a poverty franchise.
The Knicks of hockey. The Knicks of hockey.
Or the Washington Commanders of hockey. Like it's like just a disgrace to the league. Like I don't get it.
So how do you expand it?
We're 3 years removed from them being the hottest team in NHL to that they just forgot how to play defense. Like I don't get it. Like I don't get it.
Well,
all right. So
there's
going into that year, this is why like the Devils got like just so lucky, and the Flyers should have gotten lucky too if they didn't draft Patrick. But the Avalanche were the worst team; they drafted 4th. The Canucks were the second worst; they drafted 3rd. The Devils were the 3rd from worst; they got the 1st overall. The Coyotes were the 4th worst; they drafted 5th. Like in the Flyers were the 19th worst team, and they went from there to 2nd. And they drafted Patrick, and you even look at like the Devils could have had Makar. If the Devils had Makar, I mean, you can't really say that because now like
then it changes.
When it had Hughes, like
it just changes the math.
Yeah,
it just changes the math. They would have drafted differently throughout. Yeah. They probably would have gotten better. Like it just would have changed the timeline. Like that's and it's where being mediocre is dumb. And this is what frustrates me when that's how there's one path to me. There's one path to building a good team, and it's through the draft. And I feel like I rail against the cap every here and there. And I know it was instituted to save the league from itself, but it has made it that you have one way. There's one way to do it. And otherwise there's no way. You have to have the right cap space, the right enticement at the right year that the free agent decides he wants to hit the market. Otherwise, I mean, how Ovechkin hasn't moved, Crosby hasn't moved. If McDavid moves, I don't know what the hell happens to the Oilers franchise, but like these guys don't go anywhere.
McDavid's not going to move, but here's it. So like the Oilers are a perfect example. They can't get over the hump, and they have McDavid and Draisaitl And now Darnell Nurse making $9.5 million, which is obscene for who he is. He's a solid defenseman. He's not worth anywhere near $9.5 million. But you have the three of them literally destroying their whole salary cap structure. And that's where, like,
Toronto's in a similar situation, right? I mean,
yeah, similar, but not as bad because like Nylander isn't crushing them. He's only at like, was he at 6.5 or something like that? So, hold on, let's bring it up.
well, the point being is when you're paying two guys and you don't have those depth pieces already there,
Yep.
it's tough to build a rest of a team.
Yep. Yeah. So Draisaitl and McDavid, two players, are taking up a quarter of your cap, or 20% of your cap.
That's insane. And you just go back. Your depth is that of the '93 San Jose Sharks or the Ottawa Senators, like how bad they were, and that's your depth. Like,
yeah, and like it's another high pick, Nugent Hopkins. He's making 5.1. We brought in Hyman. I mean, I like Hyman, but outside of that, like it's insane. Like you can't pay anyone. You got Cody Ceci making 3.2. Like they're deep, and they're going to have to pay Evan Bouchard. Anyway, I don't want to talk about the Oilers, but like my point is, like, if asset management too, like at a certain point, if they really want to take the next step, like if you have McDavid, do you need Draisaitl?
Well,
or
I mean,
if you trade Draisaitl, can you get two guys that can total what Draisaitl does as an individual and give you more cap flexibility? Like if they're younger and they're cheaper, but like you can't in the NHL because of the hard cap, you can't be that hard. You can't be that top heavy. You can't be hard. You can't be that top heavy.
She said.
And it's funny they didn't. It's homegrown talent, but like when you're drafting that high, it's again comes down to asset management. Like if they were smart when they were, especially before last season, because now they're locked in because they made the Western Conference Finals, but like it wasn't smoke and mirrors, but like you need more depth than that if you want to consistently have chances at getting to the cup. Like the reason why the Bruins have been so good for so long, because look at the contracts that Bergeron and Marchand got. Like, it's going to change a little bit because Charlie McAvoy got paid.
And Pasta's going to get paid.
So like it's going to change a little bit. Marchand's going to get paid. Probably they won't break the bank, but as it goes up a little bit, like it's just what happens. The Devils are going to be there.
The cap's also about to jump in like what, 2 years?
Yeah, and that's crushed a lot of teams. The hard cap. We'll go back to hard. The hard cap is it's
pause.
It's it has created a standstill. There's no movement because everyone's hard. There's no movement. Like you can't get anything done.
You don't want those two things. There needs to be movement.
Yeah,
she'll be unhappy.
Yeah.
Let's escalate it.
But is like I don't know why I hate the cap. Is one that's the case, right? Like everybody's in this holding pattern for now. What 3? We're entering year 3 post. Money in escrow. 2 years in escrow. Next year will be 3 in escrow. That it's going to kind of the cap's only going to go up marginally.
Well,
I think next year, and that's the last year.
So the initial projections were that the cap was going to go up like 3 or 4 million, and then Gary came out and said that he poo-pooed that and said that it's probably only going to looking at it now it's probably going to have go up like $1 million, but like I think that's just him just trying to play hardball. And also trying to warn the GMs, be like, don't get all excited with all this extra cap room because he doesn't like it when all these guys, the cap was put in place to protect teams from themselves, but they still don't. It didn't work.
No, that's why free agents get overpaid for too long.
Yep. That's why Darnell Nurse is making.
Teams could just say, I'm not giving out a 7-year contract, and overpaying everybody. Teams could stop doing that, but they always know there's one team that will. And if you're pursuing that guy and you just happen to be, that's Kevin Hayes in a nutshell. He happened to be the second best center heading free agency that year. If you want to know why he's getting paid that money, that's why. That just is.
Got 10.
Yeah. You can't just judge bad contracts based on bad contracts. Like, you could judge the team for making a decision when they weren't ready. Someone else would have paid Kevin Hayes that money for that term. He was the second best center to hit the market.
If you go back to it, they signed him. They make the playoffs the first season, and then the world changed. If you keep going back to that, you just wonder how different things are after that. I think we should change this and try to go a little bit into the positive, venture into the positive waters, even though they're very shallow, and maybe talk about some of the positive things that have happened this season, like TK, and we already
Cam York, TK.
We already talked.
Cam York's their best defenseman.
Yep. Well, I think Sanheim's had a good year, and
Sealer's had
I like Sealer.
I like Sealer.
It was tough to like him last year outside of his his toughness. He is tough as nails. But now that he has a competent defensive partner in Braun, he's playable. He's solid. People forget he was playing with Yandel. It was horrendous. So, a guy trying to get back in the sixth.
What's
that? 6th, 7th.
Yeah,
I said he's still a 6th, 7th D man on his best day.
And this is before I head out. If he can also step up if needed, if you turn around and you trade Provorov,
don't say it. Don't say what you're going to say.
No, I'm saying you move him up, he goes from 6 to 5. That's what I was saying. I'm not saying move him up to the first line. No, I'm saying while there be a drop off, he's still a serviceable defenseman.
Yeah, no. He's fine on a third.
He's your bottom. Yeah.
Right.
And you have a guy like Ronnie Attard, who was up a little bit last year. He's a young right-handed D. He's going to get a shot in the next year or so. And
my concern with someone like Sealer, when we say 6, 7 to 5, is then you're an injury from going from 5 to 4.
Yep.
And I think that his role is at 6, 7, where he's never injured, barring re-injuries, he's never elevating to a second pair guy.
Yep. And you also have a guy like
Zamula. 29 years old. There's a reason why he's at.
You also have a guy like Zamula, who they see as a 4 or 5. I think he's a guy that could be a high 5 or a low 4. Ideally, your third pair next season is probably a combination of Sealer, Zamula, and Attard. Sealer probably plays more consistently than the other two since they're younger and they're going to get their feet wet. But that would be my guess, because you need a top pair of D, especially if you move Provorov, who will get you. I think even though he's he's not as highly thought of right now, I still think he gets you a first rounder. Now maybe it's a late first rounder. Or a prospect, maybe a second and a solid prospect. And that's what they need. They need guys. They need more kicks at the can. So you got guys like him. Offensively, no Cates. See you, Chris.
Thanks. It's nice to talk.
Enjoy cheer.
Good to be back. Yeah.
You have guys like Noah Cates, who's impressed. He obviously can't on a good team can't be playing top 6, but he can be a 9, forward number 9 to 11, and if he's doing this well, granted on a bad team, but playing this well on in a top 6 opportunity, then that means in the future that he could easily be a solid third liner, which is what you need more of that. And then a guy that has been hurt all year, Bobby Brink. Like, they're very high on him. Obviously, he's got to stay healthy. I think this is his first real injury, but he's going to get a chance next year. Wade Allison's actually, even though he hasn't been ultra productive, he's still in the mix. Owen Tippett has shown that
Tippett's has been excellent.
Yeah, he started really good. He dipped, but he's come on strong. And considering that he was right on the verge of maybe getting thrown into the doghouse with Torts, he's rebounded, and his shot is incredible. Ironically, he's got a little bit of chemistry with JVR and Frost. Frost has looked better. He was terrible last night, so he's got to play better against the better teams as the season goes along. But he's shown more signs of being closer to the player that they had hoped. And people have to remember he lost a ton of time with injuries and COVID and everything that hurt his development. So it takes
tough age.
Yep. And especially for a guy that's smaller that needs to find his game and his spot at the NHL level. So, it's going to take, a little bit longer. I still think it's a possibility he gets packaged with someone in a hockey trade, God willing that Chuck's not making that trade. But, I don't think they're as far off as people think if the right moves are made.
I straddle a line here because I think they're far off until they get high-end talent. And when do you think, you think Gauthier spends another year in NCAA next year?
Yeah.
Or you think he comes up?
He's playing college next year, I think. Because I bet you he plays college next year, goes to World Juniors. They hope he dominates World Juniors, which he was good this year. A lot of people were down on him this year in the World Juniors because he didn't stand out and dominate. There was one guy that dominated, and that was Bedard. Shane Wright, a top 5 NHL draft pick who played NHL games this year. And he didn't stand out as a completely dominant player. Bedard's a better player, but he's probably a better overall hockey player than Bedard is at this very moment because he's physically more mature, and he's another guy that lost a lot of time playing. But he wasn't going to come out and just dominate. U.S. was a team that was a very deep team. They didn't have guys that really stood out and just dominated play. So I thought he was good. I think it was a step in the right direction. I think he's a big guy. I think he'll he's I think they found someone with him. He's dominated as a true freshman. Dominate NCAA hockey. That's good. I mean, look what Farabee did.
I think that people discount how hard that is because I think that people who are I don't want to say casual hockey fans because you might be a Flyers fan but not know what college hockey looks like. You are playing against older talent. You are playing against bigger talent. You are just it's different. I think before the pathway through the NCAA, before some years ago, it was seen as a lesser pathway, and now I think a lot of clubs see it as a more viable one because it's free to them. If you go to it's just you get an extra year when that player if they're going to go from there to the AHL. You get an extra year, maybe 2, rather than juniors where you age out at a younger age. Plus, you're playing against guys who are on the higher end. Really, when you're playing first-line talent at the NCAA, you're playing against bigger, stronger guys,
older,
more NHL style.
You're playing. You're closer to playing an AHL level game than you are in juniors because people don't understand, and I get it. It's the casual,
it's inside.
The casual fan doesn't realize this. So, NCAA hockey, outside of your NHL prospects like Gauthier, they're not true freshmen. They've aged out of juniors for the most part. They've played at least 2 seasons of juniors. So when they're coming in, they're 20 and 21. So the bottom, outside of your, let's say your top 5 to 7 players on your really good, like Boston College and BU and Denver and North Dakota, outside of your top 5 players, they're all 20 to 23-year-olds. So that's a lot closer to playing AHL hockey as far as the physicality aspect and the maturity aspect of, again, getting an education, being on a schedule, than playing junior hockey, where junior hockey, sometimes you're playing against 16-year-olds that are.
Well, and the game is not as wide open, right? Like the junior hockey game is a very wide open game.
Yep.
Where you get a lot more
of a pro
responsible
game.
Teams. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's more like when you watch like college football and you have certain teams like Alabama, they play a pro, like it's a pro game. Whereas, if you, let's say BYU, that are like, it's it's more of the classical college game than a pro type game. But
so on your positive side, Paul, because we're not running out of time, but we're running up to, I want to make sure we hit some of these points. So on the positive side, right, they're going to shit JVR's contract no matter what. You move him at the deadline, no matter what, it's gone next year.
Yep.
We all expect, including I think Ellis, that he's going to be LTIR from the jump. Like that's just, so that's 12 million-ish, right? If my math
13.
is correct?
Yep.
13. Okay. $13 million in house money, right? But you do have some RFAs that you're going to sign. They're not going to command big money. So say you have, out of 13, you have 12. Well, now it's going to be less than 12. 11. That assumes you spent 2 on quite a handful of RFAs. Is that fair? I'm not looking at cap friendly.
So your RFAs next year would be your goalies are all signed, so you don't have to worry about that.
Your D is fine.
York, you have to re-sign York, but that's not going to be very expensive. Frost is an RFA. McEwen's an RFA. Cates. So my guess is it's like probably $4 million.
$4 million. So you have $9 million.
Yeah, wait out. Oh no, Allison's signed, but yeah. So yeah, and then depending, you're probably gonna.
And that's assuming you move nobody.
Assuming you don't move nobody, correct.
So $9 million, the big names, kind of when I looked at it a week ago, that I would say that I'd be looking at where the Flyers are, which are under 30. Because we don't, over 30, you'd be looking at, they're really looking to compete next year. I don't know. Like, it's just this, they're too good to be and not good enough to be mediocre. They're like in that bottom half of middle teams, depending on how big you define the middle. Right? So
yep.
Under 30 is where I'd be looking. Right? So under 30, the big names, because I don't think they'd be looking for D-men, would be Pasta, which I think he remains in Boston.
Yep.
Dylan Larkin, Sean Monahan.
I think Larkin stays in Detroit. I think he wants to be part of that. I think Stevie Y wants him. I just like Pasta. It's just going to be, or like what's his name in Nashville last year, Forsberg. I think it comes down to the very end, right before July. I think he gets done in June, right before the deadline.
Sean Monahan.
Yeah, I'm not interested.
That.
Yep.
Timo Meyer's a name that I like. I think we both think that he ends up staying too.
I actually don't think he stays. But he's not a guy that I think the Flyers should even entertain. He's purely a winger. That's first and foremost. His actual salary is 10 this year. Cap hits, I think, only 5 or 6. And there's gonna be a lot of teams looking, going after him. So his salary is gonna go up. We're
And then
looking at
your name. Yeah. And then your name that you like is Bertuzzi.
Yeah, and Bertuzzi had an awesome year last year. He's had issues staying healthy. He's a little older. He's he's 28. I think, and he's also a Flyers type player, a very much a Torts type player, and a guy that they need. They need a guy with some toughness that's also skilled. A guy in front of the net, a net front presence, which they don't have currently. That would help tremendously on the power play. So I think you could get him for around like the 6.5, and maybe not a long-term deal because of his injury issues. So that might help.
A typical Flyers move. Patrick Kane is a free agent.
Yeah, I mean, even
that's like if you want to talk about a Flyers move, a guy on the wrong side of 30 with a big name is like a historical Flyers move.
Yeah. I don't think you're going to get that. And you had said you're not going to look at D, but if they do indeed trade Provorov, as we had discussed, because there's been it sounds like neither side are happy with each other. So it sounds like he's gone. There's a guy like Matt Dumba would be the only big name that I would probably consider that could be in that top pairing with like York. A guy like Ryan Graves in Jersey, he's only 28, he's only making 3.1. But he's a guy they already have. He's a guy in the middle that like it's kind of, unless you get him for like short term, it's really just kind of overkill. And he's probably going to want to re-sign with Jersey just to have a chance to win. Looking at everyone else, like there's no one that really. Oh, we could sign Michael Del Zotto. He's a guy we've never had before.
Well, Nolan Patrick's a free agent.
He is. Oh, guess who else is a free agent?
Philip Myers.
Hagen III.
But I think that so when we started this talk, it was like optimism, pessimism, optimism, pessimism. And I think that we're both in this state where we're living in reality, which is they need top end, right? 1C, top end scoring, top level player. And it's how does that get done? Like that's really, because until that gets done, this is where they are. And that's going to be like pick 10 to 15.
Yep. Well, I think they'll still be, in my opinion, they're still going to fall in the top, in the top 5, or I'm sorry, the bottom 5.
I don't think. Look, here's where I say, like Torts is the right hire and the wrong hire, because what you see in the difference between those teams that they beat is good coaching. Those teams that they beat, those bottom, right, where they beat Arizona.
Yep.
Who else they beat on that? Like those teams
Ducks.
are. Yeah. And I feel like they're going to be too well coached to be in the bottom 5. Just based on goaltending, and cardio. Or maybe not cardio, goaltending and responsibility. Let's put it that way.
Right.
They're not going to leapfrog Chicago or the Coyotes, right?
No, they're not. I think it's safe to say that. All right, so let's say your bottom 5 is locked in: the Blackhawks, Columbus, Anaheim, Coyotes, and the Sharks. They all have 13 or less wins. Arizona having 13, the Blackhawks having all the way down to 10. Then the Flyers only have 15. The Canadians, who technically are below the Flyers, I think they're in a better position.
They should pick it.
I actually like where the Canadians are. I think they have a really chance to turn around a lot faster. although they don't have a goalie. But I like what they've done with their team in their quickened rebuild. So let's say the Flyers are going to finish 6th, and then the Canadians will finish 7th or 8th, something like that. If you're in the top 6, like, you can still easily get the first overall pick or move up to 2 or move up to 3. If they can move up in the top 3, they're going to get a really good player. If they're not first, they're not going to get Bedard, obviously. So they can still end up with a really good player and who may or may not be on the team next year. And some people might be pissed off about that, but this isn't the NFL. First round picks, even in your top 5, don't necessarily make the team the first year. I still
maybe
think
not the first 2.
I still think he would, but we'll see.
So what are the chances if Arizona ends up with the first pick, he says no?
I say 0.
I'm just curious because, like, that's
so.
right,
This is what I think happens. The Coyotes are going to get their agreement and everything for the ring. That's what I believe. I think that's going to be in place. And then if you take a step back and you look at, you got Clayton Keller who's good. They have another player. I'm spacing on him. Humphrey. I can't remember his name. You have Logan Cooley from last year that they drafted. Was a 3rd or 4th overall, whatever it was. Who's very good.
Good player. He's a good player. Yeah.
Yeah, and and they have some good deep prospects. They do have
Ghost.
Yeah, they have Ghost, who's going to be the savior, obviously. I don't think he says no. I just had that feeling, but I mean, who the hell? Like, who am I? I don't know. I just don't. Since Lindros, who has said no?
There hasn't been one, I don't think. But this is also that level of prospect and that level of situation.
It's true, and he's a millennial. I just don't think so.
I think he's Gen Z, right? Millennials are like the generation below us.
Still, like, I don't see it happening because then he's labeled for the rest of his career. I just don't see that. But that's just me. I also don't think that. Well, I mean, if you look, I
think Pittsburgh ends up with the number 1 pick anyway.
Yeah, it's true. I don't think it'll be the Coyotes, but if Gary's picking the ping pong balls, it definitely is the Coyotes. And then they end up with Matthews in 2 years, which would be insane. But I don't think so. I don't think he says no. That's my guess.
I just was curious because of it being that level. Like, regardless if they don't get a stadium contract done, it's a look. It's a look.
If they don't get a stadium, if they don't get an arena deal done, they got to move. Because, like, I'm sure it's a cool atmosphere, and, like, if it's a temporary thing, sure, for a couple years, 2-3 years, fine. But, like, if you don't have an arena, like, what's the point? They're not going to make any money. So
yeah, I agree. But yeah, that's it's a deep draft, right? And it's easy to say when you're going to possibly be picking, like, 5 to 9 or 10 to say, but it is. There's Fantilli on a line with Bedard. He's I think the consensus number 2 right now. He's a nice player. There's a Russian kid, but everybody's going to be staying away because we don't know really what the situation there is, who's also, talked about as a top 3 guy. So he might be there, because teams might not touch him. He might be there in that later first round area, who's supposed to be a really good talent, kind of an enigma right now. But he's supposed to, playing with professional, how the KHL is, right? Like playing with professionals. So it is a deep draft. We'll see, but I think you have $9 million. You have a lot of money right now. Like that when you're talking about that is a high end guy to get. It's just they got to hit the market and want to come, and you still are going to have another move up your sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, I think next year is like no matter what happens, even if they get Bedard, I think it's a non-playoff season personally.
For sure, he's not going to be ready yet.
The Metro is so good.
And he's not going to be McDavid. Would it take a year for him to get to 100 points his second year?
Yeah, well, because Manning broke his leg in half.
But nonetheless, you can't expect. I think Crosby, like he had, pretty close to immediate success, but really it was that second year that he took a big leap.
But
like even those guys,
the Flyers will have a better team. So if he goes to the Blackhawks, that team's going to be putrid. Like they're going to be so bad, and because you traded away everyone, so
yeah,
I that's what I don't get. The Flyers weren't going to be that bad even without Torts. They weren't going to be that like as bad as they are as the Blackhawks are. So that's why I'm sort of happy that they've brought a culture. And like there's a legitimate atmosphere, a return to Flyers hockey where they play hard, they play physical, they play. I went to the game the other night on Thursday against the Coyotes. Yeah, the Coyotes suck, but it was enjoyable. And the team's doing so much more stuff with the arena, and the arena looks great.
It does look good. It does look good. They did a good job with the rehab.
They just have to improve the on ice thing. They're not as far. I'm gonna positive Paul is gonna stay for until the draft, and then when they get screwed with the lottery, then I'll be negative.
Well, they have a better chance. What kind of lottery gives you a better chance to move backwards than it does to stay the same? Like
the draft ladder's got to go. The whole reason for the draft floor is so that you can't tank like the Penguins did and the Capitals did. It's too hard. I mean, it's not too. I mean, you can still accomplish the goal. I mean, look at the Coyotes, but but they're not embarrassingly bad. Like they could.
The Sixers were.
They're not putting the equivalent of me, you, and Chris on the ice. Like they actually have to pay guys.
I had a goal yesterday. I'll have you know.
And like if you're the worst team in the league, you get the first overall pick. End of story. Like there shouldn't be any of this.
Just stop. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. 100%. I think all it does is keep bad teams bad for longer. That's my opinion when it comes to the lottery.
Yes, I would agree. And I still think there should be you can't pick top 3 more than twice in 4 years. I think there should be a rule, which there is now. You can't pick top 5 more than 3 times in 5 years, which is a lot.
Yeah, but when you institute those, you also give an unfair advantage to the teams that have already done it. I like that you have to change something, but it does it then comes after. So I don't there's no way to go back in time. But because it was okay before, you have those teams that got those picks. Not that it always means success. I'm just saying, when you change it, there were teams before that had that advantage.
I would agree. All right. Well, I think that's a good spot to.
It's a good spot to leave off. Yeah. Other than that, I guess we'll be back Monday nights, 7:30. Tendys on Pattison. Hopefully, Chris can join us for more than half the show. But Tendys on Pattison.
Chris better have his pom poms out next week.
As the friend of maybe your assistant coach coined it, the best show hosted by former Archbishop Ryan goaltenders on the internet. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we'll be back next Monday at 7:30. I'm going to throw up just like I used to, as long as I can remember how it's done. the show lineup and then go off. But Philly Sports Alliance, that is our home. Well, we're going to have to change this graphic. I don't know if everything is the same here, but I'll put it up to talk about the lineup from the other shows.
I think that's Fuzz's.
So
Chris's job.
It should be, but I'll be the team player. All types of shows on Philly Sports Alliance. You like the page, you'll get that notification whenever any of the shows go live. If I can speak English. Lots of Eagles talk right now, lots of football talk right now. Ryan and Eric, I believe, are on right before us, talking Eagles. And then we're here. We're going to ignore that Thursdays at 5:30. I would never make that time now. But we're going to be on after the Football Smack Talk show on Monday nights. So keep your eye out for Philly Sports Alliance and the different shows, like the pages, so you'll be notified whenever any other show goes live. Otherwise, see you guys in a week.